skeletons speak with such a screech. You'll shake and shudder in surprise when you hear these zombies shriek. Spooky, scary skeletons and shivers down your spine. Shrieking skulls will shock your soul and seal your doom tonight.
What is up, guys? It's that scary time of the year again. Filing your taxes. And also Halloween. It's actually kind of dark how we can't even celebrate the fun side of this supposedly frightening occasion by dressing up in fancy costumes and hitting up the clubs or house parties, you know, given this cursed year. So we're actually forced to stay home and face the more realistic terrors upon us, but with that uplifting revelation out of the way, I thought what better pick-me-up for those of us celebrating Halloween at home than a good old-fashioned horror movie marathon. Just got possessed by Southern Dad. Now, I actually have a love-hate relationship with the genre. I genuinely love supernatural or creepy stories, or even just true crime stories or murder mysteries. But alas, I am also a total wimp. So as much as I am drawn or have a morbid curiosity for these sort of films, I have to watch them with one other person who I can annoyingly hide behind or cling onto during tense or suspenseful scenes, lest I watch these in broad daylight with all the lights on, and I mean, what's the fun in that? I've also found in my years of watching movies that good quality horrors, at least in this day and age, are like finding needles in a haystack. I feel like you gotta wade through a lot of the campy, cliched, and cheap jump scary types, which personally don't really stick with me, to get to the ones that have more unique and truly terrifying stories, the ones that linger in your memory that appear most vividly just as you're about to sleep. Love that. So I thought I'd make this list spotlighting some of the more underrated horror films in recent years for those who were tired of the latest cookie-cutter Blumhouse duds. Alright, I've rambled on long enough. Let's get to the spooky stuff. So first up is Jeremy Saulnier's 2005 horror thriller, Green Room, and hoo boy, please don't watch this just before or even after eating. I'm not surprised this one's adopted quite a bit of a cult following over the years. I wouldn't say it's for those with a weak stomach for gore. I definitely fall into the category, and I did not know what I was in for, but I can say with wholehearted confidence that this film grips you from the first act and just doesn't let go. So the premise of Green Room revolves around a punk band named Ain't Right, struggling musicians hunting down gigs across the Pacific Northwest. After their latest show gets cancelled, a radio host hooks them up to a new gig at this somewhat run-down, isolated bar. You can imagine their surprise when they realize it's actually a bar of neo-Nazi skinheads. Yikes. And when one of the band members witnesses something they shouldn't have, they find themselves held hostage in the bar's green room, and our gloriously gory and violent thriller ensues. So this is a survival horror film above anything else, and it absolutely excels in doing just that. The direction of the film almost transports you into the same bar our characters are fighting for their lives in, with shots that offer an uneasy sense of claustrophobia and tension. And you really feel the griminess of the place. I guess the grungy filter used throughout the film adds to this, but they did a fantastic job with setting this filthy and unsafe cinematic atmosphere. Emily Vanderweer from Vox described it as the cinematic equivalent of licking a public restroom floor, which I would say, stylistically speaking, is pretty accurate, but it honestly works in all the best ways given the theme of this film. The acting in this movie is also fantastic. You've got Patrick Stewart, who really carries the sinister aura in every scene he's in, which also adds to a lot of the movie's suspense. You've got the late Anton Yelchin, who's outstanding. You can seriously feel the guttural feelings of dread and anxiety with the way he portrays his character, and I honestly wish I could watch him in more stuff. He was also great in Fright Night and Thoroughbreds if you guys want to check out more of his work, but yep, his talent truly shines in this one. So like I said, this movie does great in being an unsettling and shocking thriller, though I feel that most of the shock factor is very much due to the really visceral and just sometimes in-your-face gore, which I gotta admit sometimes felt gratuitous. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who've seen this and think that I'm just being squeamish and staffed, but expect some pretty graphic violence. At the same time, it's a film you just can't get your eyes off of. You're gonna find yourself really rooting for the characters and feeling just as much fear for the villains, and I think that the scariest bit is there are people like this. So if you're looking for a shocking, captivating, and bloody thrill ride, then definitely put Green Room on the list.
Go!
Cops are on the way.
We haven't done anything!
Doesn't matter.
We sit and we wait.
And we die.
Not if you sit and you wait.
Where are the police?
They've come and gone. Got a little complicated. Gentlemen, it won't end well.
The Invitation is one of those very rare horror films in recent times that's actually haunted me way long after I saw it. And not to be dramatic, but for some reason I still think about the final scenes of the film to this day. It's got a pretty simple story to it. Basically, it takes place in this awkward little dinner party hosted by Daenerys' lover, and we follow it from the viewpoint of Will, played by Tom Hardy clone Logan Marshall Green, and his girlfriend Kira, played by Emma Yahtzee Corinaldi. Things take some very strange and sinister turns as the night plays out, and I don't really want to dig too much into it in case case I spoil some pretty important details, but the film does really well in making you feel just as uneasy, unsettled, and tense as the main characters. The way the dinner scenes play out really capture the awkwardness of being at a party you're on the brink of ditching, as well as this unexplainable sense of doom or dread. Anyway, I don't want to get into the plot too much. It's an extremely suspenseful experience that you guys have to check out for yourselves. I will say though, the movie does take a little while to get going. It does take its time in the beginning establishing its characters and their backstories, but it all plays a vital part of the story. And when it gets to the meat of the plot, it honestly turns into this nail-biting chain of nightmarish events, and a good chunk of it is pretty rooted in reality, which again makes it a whole lot scarier, for me at least. So yeah, definitely check out The Invitation for all my Australian viewers out there. I believe it's currently available on our Netflix, so there you go.
Something doesn't feel safe here. We don't see you for 2 years, and then all of a sudden, we get invited to this lavish dinner. Don't tell me that this is normal.
What do you think is happening, Will?
Stephen King is one of those authors who knows how to write incredibly gripping character pieces, and his novella Geralds Game is no different. Adapted to a Netflix exclusive film in 2017, Mike Flanagan takes King's simple yet disturbing premise and turns it into what I think was one of the best horror flicks to come out that year. Set in an isolated lake home in Fairhope, Alabama, struggling married couple Jesse and Gerald, played respectively by Carla Gugino and Bruce Greenwood, attempt to rekindle their romance with a holiday getaway and a little kinky bedroom time. After handcuffing his wife to the bed, Gerald has an unexpected heart attack, leaving an incredibly panicked Jessie stuck, helpless, and utterly alone. No neighbors, no cleaners, just her, fully chained to the bed with her husband's corpse, the front door left ajar, and an incredibly hungry dog wandering around the porch. So interestingly enough, King's original book was initially considered unfilmable by critics, possibly due to artistic limitations and ethical considerations. Even Flanagan, the director of the film, thought the same thing, but then he went fuck it and managed to make a roller coaster thrill ride of a movie that remains deeply disturbing while steering clear of gratuitous. And while much of the horror lies in our main character's situation, I mean, I can think of few things more terrifying than being handcuffed to a bed in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, a lot of it also comes from how the film explores Gugino's character and her backstory. Like I said, the film is primarily a character study in the clothes of a survival horror, and manages to terrify us through realistic predicaments rather than relying on cheap jump scares or mindless gore. But that's not to say that some of the visuals in this film are just flat out horrific. There are a few scenes that play on your fear of things that go bump in the night, as if having to watch this poor woman wrangle with an incredibly disturbing situation isn't unsettling enough. But even with those scenes, Flanagan plays them out in effective, non-cliched ways, having you fear for the scene as if you were the character, rather than getting startled at unexpected audio or special effects. And I just have to point out how fantastic Gugino is in her role. She carried the entire film through her acting alone. Being set in a single location, in a single position for the most part, would be demanding for any actor, and a grand challenge to pull off, but she gives it her all and it shows. So definitely check out Gerald's Game on Netflix if you haven't yet. It's a compelling, character-focused horror story, and definitely one of those to keep you on the edge of your seat, as cliched as that sounds.
Gerald, say something, please.
So I've seen a ton of split reviews on The Lodge, but for me personally, it was probably one of my favorite horror movies to have watched this year, though the competition ain't exactly the strongest given the climate.
Gotcha.
Really? So The Lodge has a pretty simple story to it. A dad takes his kids to his girlfriend's lodge for a little family vacation and the opportunity for his son and daughter to bond with her and get to know her better. But you know how all this goes. Lodge, in the middle of nowhere? What bad things will happen? But despite it having a pretty stereotypical story template to play off of, this movie takes the cliched cabin story down some pretty unexpected, twisted paths. The best way I can describe it without spoiling important details is that it felt like a really fucked up Twilight Zone episode, a really heavy and disturbing one. And it doesn't help that the score and sound effects to this film are pretty unsettling. There are these scenes that offer these really strange sounding, surreal bits of audio that make you question your psychological state as much as the characters. And they really just add to the overall atmosphere of dread and discomfort throughout the film, which is great because the film wants you to feel the same sense of helplessness and confusion as the characters in it. The direction really hammers in the suspense with a lot of slow panning shots that often have unnerving, if not shocking, reveals. The directors, who also directed the really disturbing German film Goodnight Mommy, take care in keeping cheap scares to a minimum, letting the true horror of the film shine through the strange, harrowing visuals and revelations and a convincingly grim performance by leading woman Riley Keough, who seriously carries and sells the film's premise. The cinematography was also pretty neat. There were a ton of wide shots that often simulated the look of a dollhouse, a motif that actually plays an interesting key role in the movie. So I definitely recommend The Lodge for anyone who loves their atmospheric psychological horrors. I personally am a sucker for the more claustrophobic, one location type of horror films, just because it's always impressive to see just how well the director and actors make the most of the simplicity they're given. And I think the crew pulled it off fantastically with this one, so give it a watch when you can.
What is this? The power's out. We're leaving.
We can't leave.
Please let me.
We're stuck here.
When it comes to underrated horror films, Lucky McKee's May is always one of the first to come to mind. Huge thanks to YMS's Underrated Horror Films video, by the way, for blessing me with this recommendation. The dude has a pretty awesome list, so do go check it out if you're interested. Anyway, having come out in 2002 with hardly any mainstream mentions or discussions about it since, this film was seriously one of those that flew under the radar for most moviegoers, and I don't even have to whip out the box office numbers as proof, because you probably didn't even know it existed until now. But thankfully I'm here to spread the good word, because if you're a fan of strange and creepy movies, I honestly can't recommend May enough. The story centers on the titular character May, a lonely, single, and sheltered young woman traumatized by a troubling childhood. Aside from her job at an animal hospital, she keeps herself busy through her hobby of sewing and talking to the only close friend she's ever had in her life, a doll encased in a glass case that was gifted to her as a child. I don't know how a 5-year-old was even able to set eyes on this thing, let alone bond with it, but she's a weirdo, so I guess it makes sense. Eventually she forms a bordering on obsessive crush on the local mechanic, Adam. Again, I don't want to reveal too much about the plot from here, so all I can say is go see it. It's a fantastically twisted, disturbing, and really original story with turns you won't see coming. Plus, Angela Bettis does an outstanding job at portraying the awkwardness of May. She manages to make her appear convincingly sympathetic, but also with a desperation that borders on threatening. As with a ton of the other movies I've included in this list, this one is yet another amazing character piece with themes of human connection and social acceptance, all wrapped up in a wonderfully crafted, unsettling horror film that's bound to sear itself in your memory. The last scenes of this film, and the ending itself, were some of the most visually and emotionally disturbing bits of cinema I've seen to date, so go check it out.
I like every part of him, especially his hands. They're beautiful. Don't be mad. You've been my friend my whole life. You see me. You always have, but I need a real friend. Someone I can hold.
Perfect Blue is one of those movies, regardless of genre, that I think everybody needs to see at least once. Directed by the late Satoshi Kon, Perfect Blue follows the life of Mima Kirigo, a member of a super popular Japanese idol group. When she unexpectedly announces her retirement from the pop idol life in favor of pursuing a more serious acting and modeling career, she finds her life suddenly spiraling into a sinister web of mysterious murders, stalking encounters, and a slow but sure detachment from reality. Again, this is a film where I don't want to reveal too much of the plot. For one, there are a ton of really interesting and rich layers to it that'd be hard to explain in a single spoiler-free review, but also because it's honestly a super memorable movie experience you just have to watch for yourselves. This film managed to achieve something that I've personally never felt before while watching an animation, and that's actually make me forget that I'm watching woodenly animated 2D characters. That's just how compelling the storytelling is, and how it sucks you into the crumbling and psychologically horrifying world of our protagonist, and the trauma and stress she goes through. One of the most impressive bits about this film was its ability to truly capture one's loosening grip on reality. There are a ton of scenes in this that attempt to blur the lines between what's real and what isn't, which isn't just meant to portray the spiraling mental state of the character, but also have us experience the same confusion, getting us just as distressed as Mima and questioning what's fantasy and what's actually happening. The scene transitions among these moments are also super smooth and unexpected, just gonna throw that out there. I also love how the themes that this film explores, despite having debuted in the 90s, are actually super relevant in our current time, probably even more so than the time period it was initially released. It dives into the issues of celebrity obsession and the potentially hellish nature of parasocial relationships. That is, feeling like you know media personalities on a personal level, when really you've only gotten to know their brand image and what they choose to show. I'm actually currently working on a huge video on this that I'm excited to share hopefully soon, so keep an eye out for that. But yep, we've all heard stories of obsessive fans and unhealthy one-sided relationships with the celebrities we admire, and this film just takes those concepts and turns them into full-blown terror. So yes, please watch Perfect Blue, you won't regret it. It's honestly one of the best horror movies I've seen, animated or otherwise. It's just honestly so well crafted and just one of those films that'll have you thinking about it long after you've seen it. Two things I want to note though is that the animation, I gotta admit, isn't the best, and that might turn off some viewers, but like I said, because the story is so good, however you feel about the visuals likely won't matter soon after you get into it, since you'll be super engaged in the characters and what's happening. Also, I believe the budget for this film was radically reduced after the production studio suffered major damages from the Kobe earthquake of 1995, so yeah, that probably explains it. Secondly, this film shares some striking similarities to Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan, which is another great movie that grapples with the same themes that I also recommend you go watch. But after this one, because Perfect Blue does it way better in my opinion.
のイメージはもう息苦しいんや。それに今はアイドルなんか。待って、電話が入ったけん。はい、切り声ですけど。もしもし？もしもし？もう。あ、お母さん？なんか間違いやった。ファックスか。誰だろう。
Alright, look, you've probably already heard that Hereditary is good. I think most people already know this. Hereditary is good. Go see it. It's good. Initially, I was gonna add it to this list, but being the unexpectedly huge hit it was upon release, I feel like I'd just be needlessly parroting a lot of the other well-made recommendation videos that have beat me way to it. Also, it's likely you've already seen it, stumbled across the memes, or have heard everyone and your second cousin recommend it, so I thought I'd focus on Ari Aster's other, yet somehow less successful hit just the year after, and that's his beautifully unsettling folk horror, Midsommar. Or Midsommar. Midsommar. Midsommar, otherwise known as Gaslighting the Movie, follows a group of college students as they travel to Sweden for a peculiar festival known as the Midsummer Celebration. Occurring once every 90 years, they soon find out that perhaps this little commune isn't as innocent as they look or make themselves out to be. Yeah, okay, I know, it sounds like a pretty stereotypical premise for a horror film, but like a lot of the other movies on this list, I'm not gonna say too much about what goes down because it does take some pretty surprising and deeply disturbing twists and turns. It's a tad bit of a slower burn than its predecessor, Hereditary, but that's because it plays to one of its greatest strengths, its characters. The film happily takes its time in establishing its key protagonists, their desires, their dilemmas, and their overall personalities, as well as their connections with one another. At the forefront is our main girl Danny, played by woman crush Florence Pugh, and her super toxic and almost cringe-worthy relationship with her cringe-worthy boyfriend, Christian, played by Jack Reynor. Aside from crafting us a haunting horror tale chock full of creepy visuals and incredibly tense, nerve-wracking scenes, Aster chooses to place just as much focus on exploring these two and the realistic complexities of a failing, unhealthy relationship, and whew, do these guys have it bad. And it doesn't feel forced or out of place either. These issues fit well with the themes of the movie and Danny's journey of self-discovery throughout it all. The acting is all excellent. I cannot praise Florence Pugh enough. She carries this film, and I can't wait to see her kick ass in the new Black Widow flick. And the cinematography is eye porn. I am not kidding. I never thought a horror movie could look so beautiful. It's also really impressive how Aster was able to create a horror movie in broad daylight. There's hardly a nighttime scene in this film, and yet, without having to rely on our fear of the dark or things that go bump in the night, he still manages to create and maintain this chilling, tense atmosphere throughout the film. The visuals are just so twisted and disturbing that they're just as frightening even when taking place during the day. So definitely check out Midsommar. It's super fitting to watch this time of the year, or if you're going through a bad breakup. Just trust me.
Like another world. Tomorrow's a big day.
Is it scary?
What is it?
It has special properties. What am I going through?
We just need to acclimate.
I don't want to acclimate, I want to go.
So that's my list for, I guess, the more little-known, unconventional horror flicks to watch this Halloween. For those sick of the mindless slashers or the half-assed remakes that tend to come out this time of the year, a couple of these are from the production company A24. I'm a slave for their movies, and if you love more independent, human-centric films and stories, horror or otherwise, I highly do recommend checking out the movies they put out recently. Some of my non-horror favorites include Mid-90s and 8th Grade. But anyway, let me know if you guys have seen any of these, if you enjoyed them as much as I did, or if you completely disagree and think that my taste in horror is off the rails. All discussion is good discussion. Just keep it respectful and spoiler free. Otherwise, do leave your horror movie picks or horror movie lineup for Halloween this year in the comments below. I'm always down for new recommendations. And you know the drill. Like this video if you did, subscribe for more pop culture reviews, commentary, and video essays, and I'll see you guys in the next one.